What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Is Sony planning to release a new dedicated handheld? Well, based on some recent reports, that's been the discussion because it seems like they've become very, very interested in that space, especially after the PlayStation Portal, to where we could actually get a successor to the Vita. We'll go over that report and everything else here today. Also, we're going to be talking about Sony potentially having some more hardware and accessory releases to close out the year. Of course, all eyes are on December 3rd with that anniversary, but it seems like they at least have a few things to announce here soon. And then we also have Nintendo and Metroid Prime. We have Metroid Prime Remastered on the Switch, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, that's coming up next year. But what about 2 and 3? Well, based on a recent announcement and then some more rumors going around, seems like we could see this lineup very similar to another series of titles that we've had released pretty recently. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members of the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with another release into Nintendo Switch Online, specifically the Game Boy application, as we can see this over on Nintendo's official account, where they say it's up to Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong to rescue Donkey Kong from Captain K. Rool. Donkey Kong Land 2 is now available to play for Nintendo Switch Online members. So interesting, because we just had Donkey Kong Land 1, that was announced, went to the service immediately. Now we have the second one, so I can only assume that next week they'll announce the third one. It's an interesting cadence where they're just doing every week, basically, seemingly at this point anyway, a new Donkey Kong Land game going in. We also know that they are opening that other branch, or that other section for their theme park in Japan next month as well for Donkey Kong. And then we do have the HD Wii game, Donkey Kong Country Returns, whatever, that's coming out to start off 2025. So a lot of Donkey Kong right now, but seems like that's a big push for them currently, and they're interesting titles from the Game Boy. I mean, again, certainly a different time period, but something I think is worth at least checking out if you're just interested in kind of the history of Nintendo with Game Boy and Donkey Kong. And again, it dropped right into the service, so if you already have it, you can download it and see what you think. Also, we do have that Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days collection coming up here soon, and now it appears we at least have a look at all of the games that are part of this collection. We can see this is posted up. This is by Nintendo, who noted these screenshots of the back of the box itself. And I mean, there's a number of games here. We've had a few of them announced at this point, but they're talking about 14 games being included here. This is quite the collection in that case. And while I'm not familiar with all these different Yu-Gi-Oh games, I mean, it does seem like they're hitting a bunch of sectors here. I see Duel Monsters 2, Dark Duel Stories, the Sacred Cards, Worldwide Edition, Worldwide Championship Tournament 2004. I know there's a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh games out there, so there's certainly some that are left off this list that people would like to see, but it's hard to argue with a collection that has apparently 14 games being included, especially for Yu-Gi-Oh fans. I'm sure there's at least a handful off this list to check out. I remember playing a few of the old handheld games, the old Game Boy and Game Boy Advance titles, but it might be worth picking up just to even see what I missed out on. I picture a lot of the Yu-Gi-Oh games, other than there are some on consoles that are a little bit different, where you're even more of a strategy game, but I usually picture them as just the standard card titles where you go around, collect cards, and just play other people. But still, it was interesting at that time to have that as a portable game, especially alongside the show that was really popular at that time. So it might be worth checking out this collection just for the nostalgia anyway. Oh, and we did have a rating pop up for an announcement that Sony had previously made for the 30th anniversary, which you can see Gamatsu had this posted. And that's for My First Gran Turismo. That's on PS5 and PS4 as it has been rated in Taiwan. Again, this is part of that PlayStation 30th anniversary announcements. This is due out this holiday, as was already announced, and as being noted here by Gamatsu, could arrive around that December 3rd time period, where we sort of feel like Sony's at least going to do something there. Could be press releases, could be tweets, or whatever, just acknowledging this while also making these things available. This is going to be a free, you could even say a demo, an introduction for Gran Turismo. As has been mentioned, they'll be pulling from some of the older tracks and cars and stuff as sort of a nostalgia-driven thing. But it would make sense for people who maybe saw Gran Turismo 7. They're like, they're on the 7th one. How do I get into that now? Well, this is your first Gran Turismo. So I know it's Gran Turismo. They're car games, right? So they're not necessarily, it's not a big canonical storyline they have to start with the first one. but this would also just make it a bit easier for people to jump in because it's free, and if you get a PS5 and then a nice new OLED TV, it would probably be one of the best instances to show all that off in action. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony and this apparent handheld that they are now developing, and this is coming way of Bloomberg, so naturally, a lot of people paid attention to it, and it made the rounds very, very quickly when the report broke. Actually, it was later on at night that this got out there, and this is posted up again by Bloomberg. Takashi Machizuki had the story. He says the product is aimed at expanding Sony's reach and contending with Nintendo for the portable gaming market, according to people familiar with its development. It would also counter any potential mobile hardware from Xbox maker Microsoft, which is working on prototypes in the category as well. Sony's portable device is likely years away from launch, and the company could still decide against bringing it to market, the people said, asking not to be named, discussing private plans. Now, I saw some scrutiny on that one. Well, okay, they're saying it could just not happen. And yeah, look, I think this story is very early, as in we're 3 or 4 years off of this thing even being announced and then released, so plans can change. In fact, they change all the time. I would actually be shocked if what they're planning right now does not change in some way, whether it's just them prototyping and changing up the form factor, potentially the chip that goes into it. Apparently, they are sticking with AMD here, and I think that's very important to note because we know that Valve has mentioned that the reason they have not done like a new generation of the Steam Deck is because they're still waiting for technology to get to a point where they feel comfortable of making the Steam Deck 2 so it feels like a worthy jump in that next-gen tag. They go on to say, the idea builds on the PlayStation Portal, an 8-inch handheld device Sony released in 2023 that allows users to play PS5 games by streaming them over the internet. Building a mobile device that's capable of directly playing PS5 games will potentially make Sony's software more accessible and appealing to a wider audience. And of course, Sony declined to comment. As I mentioned, I'm kind of looking at this as a 2027 or 2028 thing. Originally, I thought, this would be something they would launch alongside of the PlayStation 6. I don't necessarily think that's required though. They could bring this out in 2027 and then do the PS6 in 2028. The reason I say that is because it's going to get like stripped down versions of PlayStation 6 games anyway, and that cross-gen period will probably be even longer. Like, this was already a pretty lengthy cross-gen period for the PS4, especially when it comes to first-party support. I mean, the fact that Sony was throwing a lot of their big titles on the PS4 and PS5, you kind of go, okay, hold on. How next gen are these games really? And I think the biggest determining factor was the hard drive. Like going from hard drive, like a spinning disk to an SSD is a big difference in terms of streaming in assets and doing other things behind the scenes. But when we go to PS6, you're gonna go SSD to SSD. The power difference, while I'm sure will be like noticeable, isn't gonna be like substantial because of the diminishing returns we have now. So if the handheld can already handle, we'll say, PS5 games at that Steam Deck level quality now, or maybe even better by 2027, I mean, it could probably play well into the PlayStation 6 generation. And in fact, if it's staggered, Sony could have a different generation launches every other year or something, or spread it out to where they have pro systems. And yes, that means a lot of hardware profiles to deal with, but Sony they're a hardware company that likes to keep a focus on their hardware, and we're seeing the PlayStation 5 and releases on PC more and more. Like, what's the difference between them? Well, I mean, you don't have to argue what's the difference between a portable system and that big old desktop you have under your desk at home. You're not walking around with that thing. So, yeah, this makes sense, I think, for Sony to tackle if they eventually can, and that a lot of this is going to be up to AMD, and then of course parts cost, and if it makes sense there. But we see people paying out, $500, $600, $700, $800 for some of these current PC handhelds, and it seems like the door is wide open for Sony to re-enter with a successor to the Vita. So I'm all for it. Yeah, absolutely. I think the more companies that take a shot at these handheld systems, the better, because it will, of course, have AMD continuing to evolve their own low-power chips. NVIDIA's waiting in the wings right now, apparently, with some of their stuff. So you never know how this could evolve going forward, but I would like to see as much competition in the handheld gaming space as possible so we can really get some impressive stuff going forward. But let me know what you think about Sony attempting another handheld. Is that a good idea? And well, we'll talk about how much it's going to cost, because that was the poll question. Next up, let's talk about some other releases and announcements that Sony seems to have lined up before the end of the year. we already talked about how there was this thought process that Sony could be teasing December 3rd for maybe a state of play or a PlayStation experience. That does coincide with the 30th anniversary for the PlayStation brand in Japan, specifically when they launched that original PlayStation system. But it does seem like they at least have some accessories that will be coming out here before the holiday season. As we can see, this is posted up. This is over on D-Labs from Bill, who's been, very solid across the board, especially when it comes to retail releases specifically, which we can see over on their site. They say Sony seems to be preparing an upcoming release of new PS5 accessories. This is a new color that will be offered for a selection of already existing accessories. So we have the DualSense Edge wireless controller in black, the Pulse Elite wireless headphones in black, and the Pulse Explorer wireless earbuds in black. Retail pricing on those is $200 for the DualSense Edge, $150 for the Pulse Elite, and $200 for the Pulse Explorer. So yeah, pretty much all the same pricing there. These will just be in black as opposed to the white color scheme. The announcement for these are expected within a month, which is the most interesting part about this, because while they could push out a PlayStation blog entry, and look, it wouldn't shock me if that's the case. They're just going to post this up through a press release and then drop it on PlayStation blog, and here's these new accessories available at this time. It could indeed be part of some sort of presentation, as people are starting to kind of think that maybe Sony does have one more left before the end of the year, and this is where they would make that announcement. I'm kind of leaning towards Sony just having a 30th anniversary post. This would be part of it, as well as that Gran Turismo, my first Gran Turismo stuff with the release date, and maybe a few other things thrown in there, and then thanking fans for 30 years of PlayStation. I don't know if they're going to have a big presentation ready to go on December 3rd, so next week, but I guess it wouldn't necessarily shock me. So we'll see in a week if Sony really does have something figured out for this, because you feel like they would also announce it at least a day or two beforehand. So we'll see what they have for the 30 years of PlayStation when that happens on December 3rd. Next up, let's talk about Metroid Prime. We have Metroid Prime Remastered on the Switch now, and then we have Metroid Prime 4, Metroid Prime Beyond coming out next year. But there was something that was announced that, one, I think is awesome, but two, had people talking about the idea of the rest of the trilogy, the current trilogy for Metroid Prime, making its way to Switch, because kind of a gap there between Metroid Prime Remastered and Metroid Prime Beyond. Well, we can see this is posted up, and this thing looks awesome. So this is the Metroid Prime 1 through 3, a visual retrospective. It's a new collaboration between Piggyback and Nintendo. Covers Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, and Metroid Prime Remastered. Includes a foreword by Metroid Prime producer, features a vast array of high-quality art and sketches from the developer, comes with exclusive Retro Studios penned introductions to each game, dozens of producer notes, offer commentaries, insights, and anecdotes on the featured artwork, stitch bound with a lavish cloth hardcover featuring an etched Samus metallic foil, which does look really cool there. I'm sure it would look awesome in person, and printed on high quality art paper. Great. So this, just on its own, is an awesome announcement. It's scheduled right now for release summer 2025. You'll want to keep an eye out for pre-orders whenever those go up, because this seems like something that will sell out very, very quickly, especially since it seems poised to come out, we assume, around that release window for Metroid Prime Beyond, which, again, people are wondering, hold on a minute. It's very, very interesting. They're doing Metroid Prime 1 through 3, but we're missing two of those titles on the Switch. Well, Samus Hunter did chime in on this, and look, I'm gonna explain why I'm pointing out this tweet in a second, because I really don't cite Samus Hunter much at all. They say, I'm looking forward to replay the entire trilogy on the Switch. Before that, about 2 Remastered, I can confirm what Grubb mentioned. It was planned as a standalone release, but got moved a couple of times, and is now planned for early next year, likely between Donkey Kong Country Returns HD and Xenoblade X. So, yeah, I do believe this is correct, mostly because, well, Nate also mentioned, hey, look, Metroid Prime 2, that has been a thing. It's just, when is Nintendo going to release it? We've seen Nintendo hold games for a long time. Like, they'll just sit on games, sometimes for 1 to 2 years. As weird as it sounds, it does come down to timing for Nintendo and trying to figure out a release cadence and schedule every single year, since they do rely primarily on first party, not as much on third party as we see Sony and Microsoft tend to do. So it does kind of seem like Metroid Prime Beyond, as we know now, of course, the whole schedule for development on that thing got thrown through a loop. It got announced all the way back E3 2017, and we're now talking about it coming out in 2025. So it's not hard to believe that things kind of got moved around in the background there. But I think what we're seeing here right now is a similar situation to what happened with Pikmin 4, in that Pikmin 4 was coming out on the Switch, and we were like, okay, well, what about, can we do something with 1 and 2, because we have 3, and then wouldn't you know it, they announced that 1 and 2 is coming out a month before Pikmin 4. So I'm kind of wondering if that's the same thing here. Let's say Metroid Prime Beyond comes out in May, just May, we'll just throw that out there, and then we'll just say Metroid Prime 1 or 2 and 3 end up in April, or like a month before. That really wouldn't shock me at this point, the way that Nintendo's been handling some of these releases of some of the older titles and ports from, at this point, the Wii. And I think it'd be really interesting to see how they would tackle Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, because that did use the Wii Remote quite a bit. But I think it's important to have Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3, and 4 all available on one platform, as Nintendo has really built up the Switch with the legacy of a bunch of different franchises all available on the system. It makes a lot of sense. And we know that the next platform will be backwards compatible. Maybe some cross-gen stuff thrown in there for Metroid Prime Beyond. Makes sense that you'd want to make sure people have the ability to play the entire series right there on their Switch. So here's hoping that's the plan. But at the very least, there's a really awesome looking retrospective here coming out for Metroid Prime. So at least keep an eye out for that. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Square Enix and that HD 2D style that they have been using more and more and more, especially when it comes to reviving older titles that people are less familiar with, because while it does retain that sort of pixel art look, it really puts it into a new perspective that I really, really like. But they have some concerns around overusing it even. We can see this as a quote. This is from the producer for Dragon Quest III HD 2D talking with Bloomberg, saying, if we were to release too many games in succession, that would lead to people being bored of those games. On the flip side, if there's too much of a span between launches, that can also lead to the series not seeming as vibrant and robust anymore. It's a sensitive topic. It's something that even my supervisors are constantly unsure and mulling over. The idea of HD 2D constantly hitting the market, even just going back and grabbing, like, we know they're going to do Dragon Quest 1 and 2, also in HD 2D. There have been discussions around Final Fantasy VI getting a remake into HD 2D, and it does get to the question mark of, if you use it too much, will it become boring? Will it become oversaturated? And it kind of is a hard style to put like a huge spin on, because while some of them do look slightly different, I mean, it still has that HD 2D look to it. And that is kind of that's the conundrum to figure out. Because will Final Fantasy VI or will Dragon Quest 1 and 2 look too similar to 3? Will Final Fantasy VI look too similar to Octopath Traveler? So it is kind of back and forth in that regard, and I would like to see them continue to evolve HD 2D, just in terms of graphical style, different little features and stuff that it can do in terms of the visuals, and that way they can keep differentiating each and every title that they release for it, because I think it is an awesome thing that we have now with this style that Square's figured out, and a way to bring back some of these classics, but you also don't want it to all blend together. So it is a tightrope that they're walking. They're trying to thread this needle. But I really hope they do give us Final Fantasy VI as a remade game in HD 2D. At the very least, take a shot at that, because I think there's a lot of potential between that title with the newer audience in that style. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, if Sony does end up releasing a PlayStation handheld in a few years, how much are you expecting it to be? Okay, $500 is the going rate here. 38% voted for. 33% say $400. Wow, we have $600 and $700 or more as well, getting 15 and 14%. I would like to think that $500 is most likely the direction they'd go, just based on Steam Deck pricing, Lenovo Legion Go pricing, the ROG Ally pricing. That would actually be on the lower end of the spectrum there if you really look at the market. But Sony would also look at this in the sense of, hey, if we get you on this handheld, you're probably just buying from us specifically with PlayStation Store, because does anyone think that Sony is going to introduce cartridges again? No, by then, they'll probably have already seen the digital physical split go way in the direction of digital. We're talking 85 to maybe 90% by 2027. That wouldn't surprise me at all, and then they'll be like, okay, this handheld will really push things over the edge, and we'll be dealing with near digital all the way across the board. So why do R&D and figure out logistics around getting a cartridge not only in the system, but also out to stores? So in that regard, they can look at this and go, okay, let's subsidize this more and more on that front end price and make up for it in the back end. So $500, but with probably more, I'd say close to the top of the line custom hardware with AMD, and hopefully be able to do some really cool things with a handheld playing. Sounds crazy now in 2024, but PS5 and also PS6 games just kind of cut down a bit. I don't know. We'll see. Here's hoping, though, we do get Sony back in the handheld market, because that Vita still feels current, and I'd like to see what Sony has up their sleeves more than 15 years later in 2027. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This from Joka says, hey, Spawnwave, you should do your own Game of the Year awards. I'm surprised more YouTubers don't do that. We will be doing the Game of the Year awards here. I'm trying to fit as many games as I can in for the year. The Game Awards thing is always weird because their cutoff is like, all right, we're cutting things off. And then there's still like 6 games coming out or something. I wanted to wait until Indiana Jones just to see if that could place on the bracket and see, maybe, who knows, maybe Indiana Jones just in general as a name can get a few rounds in, but that was my plan, was to start things up after Indiana Jones comes out in December, and hey, if it has to run into January, it has to run into January. But yes, I will be doing the whole bracket. We'll have our poll every day. People are voting on it, this game versus that game, and we'll see who the winner can be at the end of all of it, because I do think this is an interesting year for a bracket like that. There's so many games out there that are coming out in like that 80s, high 80s range in Metacritic that could have some fun matchups. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, but keep an eye out. I think in like that first or second week of December, we'll get things started. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card, or maybe you wanted to see what the Apple TV 4K could do after I had a chance to test it with emulating different systems like the PlayStation, the N64, or even the PSP, I'll leave that right below it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.